In the small town of Wilson, North Carolina, in 2006, life flowed smoothly. The streets, lined with modest houses, were calm, and neighbors knew each other by name. The Hartley family was considered exemplary. 68-year-old Marjorie Hartley, a respected widow, and her 24-year-old grandson James, who had recently returned to town after studying, lived under the same roof. Marjorie was known for her activity in the local church, and James was a quiet but ambitious young man who planned to open his own business. No one could have guessed that behind the closed doors of their home, a story was unfolding that would shake the entire town. On the evening of October 14, 2006, police received a call from a concerned neighbor reporting screams coming from the Hartley home. When officers arrived, they found Marjorie Hartley dead in her bedroom. The cause of death was strangulation. James, the only person in the house, was taken into custody for questioning. At first, the case seemed simple, a domestic dispute that may have turned tragic. But as investigators dug deeper, details emerged that no one expected to hear. Secret relationships, hidden from everyone, and motives that were difficult to comprehend formed the basis of one of the most shocking cases in Wilson history. In 2006, Wilson was a typical American town with a population of about 50,000. The economy depended on agriculture and small businesses, and social life revolved around churches, local schools, and community events. The Hartley family was part of that fabric. Marjorie Hartley, born in 1938, lived in Wilson her entire life. After her husband died in 1998, she remained in their two-story home on Oak Street. Marjorie was an active member of the First Baptist Church, participated in fundraisers, and was known for her hospitality. Neighbors described her as a vibrant woman who, despite her age, maintained a zest for life and cared for her family. Her grandson, James Hartley, was born in 1982. He was the son of Marjorie's eldest daughter, Elizabeth, who moved to Raleigh, the state capital, in the 1990s. James spent his childhood between Raleigh and Wilson, often visiting his grandmother. In 2004, he graduated from college with a degree in business administration and moved back to Wilson to be closer to Marjorie. He moved into her home, occupying a room on the second floor. According to acquaintances, James planned to open an auto repair shop and saved money by working part-time at a local supermarket. He was considered polite and driven, if withdrawn. The Hartleys' home on Oak Street was built in the 1960s. It was a modest brick house with 3 bedrooms, a large backyard, and a covered porch. Neighbors often saw Marge watering flowers or James fixing up an old pickup truck in the yard. There was no indication of trouble, but in 2005, some noticed changes. Marge began showing up to church less often, citing fatigue. James, on the other hand, spent more time at home, refusing to meet with friends. Neighbors recalled that the windows of the house were often covered and the doors were often locked. Police reports filed after the events of October 14, 2006, include statements from neighbors. One, Richard Davis, 52, who lived across the street, said he had heard loud conversations coming from the Hartleys' home late at night in the months before the tragedy. He dismissed it as a normal family dispute. Another neighbor, Linda Walker, 45, said Marjorie had begun to avoid talking about James, although she had once proudly spoken of his plans. These seemingly insignificant details later became part of the investigation. In the Hartley home, police found a typical setting: a tidy living room with family photos, a kitchen with the smell of freshly cooked food, and Marge's bedroom, where the crime took place. At first glance, there was nothing to indicate that the house hid secrets. However, in James's room, investigators found several items that raised questions: a diary with entries dated 2005 to 2006, and letters addressed to Marge but not sent. These finds became the starting point for understanding what was happening between grandmother and grandson. By the time James was apprehended, police had no clear picture of the crime. He did not resist arrest and appeared calm, although he refused to answer questions without a lawyer. His behavior contrasted with the shock that Wilson residents experienced when they learned of Marjorie's death. In the first hours after the body was discovered, no one could have predicted that the case would take such an unusual turn. Investigators had to figure out what led to the tragedy in the house that seemed like a stronghold of family comfort. On the morning of October 15, 2006, Wilson police launched a full-scale investigation into the murder of Marjorie Hartley. The house on Oak Street was cordoned off and investigators began collecting evidence. Marjorie was found on her bed in her bedroom, wearing a nightgown. There were signs of strangulation around her neck and a silk scarf, later identified as hers, was lying on the floor nearby. A pathologist arrived at the scene and gave a preliminary time of death of between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. the previous day. There were no signs of a struggle on the body, indicating that the victim likely knew her attacker and was not expecting an attack. James Hartley, the only person in the house, was taken to the station. His clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt were taken for analysis. At the time of his arrest, he made no statement other than a request for a lawyer. His calmness raised questions among investigators, but they had no basis for charges other than the fact that he was at the scene of the crime. There were no signs of forced entry or presence of strangers in the house, making James the prime suspect. The investigation team, led by Detective Robert Clark, began searching the house. In Marge's bedroom, they found a few small items, in addition to the scarf, an open book on the bedside table, a glass of water, and blood pressure medication. James's room was more revealing. On his desk lay a diary with handwritten entries. Most of the pages contained notes about everyday life, but some were emotional, with references to feelings and secrets. The police also found several unsent letters addressed to Marge, but without any specific content that would immediately indicate a motive. Neighbors interviewed that day gave conflicting accounts. Richard Davis, who lived across the street, confirmed hearing screams around 10 p.m. but did not see anyone enter or leave the house. Linda Walker said Marjorie had seemed depressed in recent months but would not share the reasons. Another neighbor, Thomas Brown, 60, said James had recently been fixing a fence in his yard and seemed tense but did not engage in conversation. A forensic examination conducted that same day revealed that James's fingerprints were on the scarf used to strangle her. This was the first hard evidence, although the defense would later argue that the prints could have been caused by everyday use of the scarf. No DNA was found on Marjorie's body, other than traces that could have belonged to James, but these were insufficient to establish a definitive conclusion. The lack of obvious signs of a struggle complicated the picture. Marjorie did not appear to have resisted. Detective Clark decided to focus on James's past and his relationship with his grandmother. Interviews with relatives revealed that Marjorie had been a key figure in James's childhood. His mother, Elizabeth, worked 2 jobs, and James often stayed with his grandmother. Elizabeth, who had come to Wilson after learning of her mother's death, was shocked and could not believe that James could have been involved. She described him as a quiet man who respected Marjorie. At the same time, police began looking into Hartley's financial records. Marge was living on her pension and her husband's savings, and renting out a small apartment in Raleigh. Her accounts were in order, but investigators noticed that she had withdrawn several large sums of cash in recent months. James, for his part, had no significant income other than his salary at the supermarket. This raised speculation about a possible financial motive, but there was no evidence yet. By the end of the first day of the investigation, the police had only preliminary evidence: fingerprints on a scarf, diary entries, and statements from neighbors. James remained at the station, but no formal charges had yet been filed. Investigators had to figure out what connected the grandmother and grandson and why their relationship led to tragedy. By October 16, 2006, the investigation into the murder of Marjorie Hartley in Wilson began to reveal details that shocked investigators. Detective Robert Clark and his team focused on James Hartley's diary, found in his room. The entries, written in 2005 and 2006, contained not only everyday notes but also personal reflections. Some pages were filled with text in which James described his feelings for an unnamed person. Phrases like, "I can't stop this," and "It's wrong, but I don't want to lose her," caught their attention. Although Marjorie's name was not mentioned directly, investigators began to suspect that the entries might be connected to her. To confirm this theory, police conducted a second search of the house. In Marge's bedroom, in a dresser drawer, they found a small box of letters written by James. These letters, dated 2005, were more explicit. In one, James wrote, "You are the only one who understands me, but I am afraid that we will not be accepted." The letters did not contain any explicit indication of the nature of their relationship, but the tone and content hinted at a closeness beyond family ties. Investigators also found photographs in James's room of him and Marge on family holidays, but some of the pictures seemed unusually personal, with the two standing closer than is customary for a grandmother and grandson. To understand the nature of their relationship, police interviewed friends and relatives. James's mother, Elizabeth, claimed to be unaware of any problems between her son and mother. However, she did mention that James had been calling her less since returning to Wilson and avoided talking about his life. Friends of James's from college said he made no mention of a girlfriend or romantic relationships, which was unusual for a young man his age. One friend, Michael Reed, 25, noted that James seemed obsessed with his grandmother, often speaking of her with admiration. A forensic psychologist assigned to the case suggested that the notes and letters might indicate an emotional or even sexual relationship between James and Marjorie. Investigators had mixed feelings about this hypothesis, but they continued to look for evidence. No direct evidence, such as intimate items or correspondence, was found in the house, but James's behavior during interrogation raised questions. On his second day at the station, he began answering questions, but his testimony was evasive. He admitted to being home on the night of the murder, but claimed to have been asleep in his room and had not heard anything suspicious. At the same time, police were looking into the financial trail. Marjorie's accounts showed that in 2005 to 2006, she regularly withdrew amounts of between $500 and $2,000. The money was not related to major purchases or debts. James, for his part, had no significant expenses, but an envelope containing $3,000 in cash was found in his room. This raised suspicions that Marjorie may have been financially supporting James, perhaps in exchange for silence or other favors. However, this theory remains speculative without further evidence. Neighbors interviewed again on October 16 provided new details. Linda Walker recalled seeing James and Marjorie walking together late one night in September 2006. They were holding hands, which struck her as odd, but she dismissed it. Another neighbor, Thomas Brown, mentioned seeing James put his arm around Marjorie in the backyard, which seemed too close. This evidence, though circumstantial, strengthened the hypothesis of an unusual relationship. By the end of the day on October 16, police had collected enough evidence to charge James with murder. The fingerprints on the scarf, the diary entries, and the neighbors' statements formed the basis of the case. But investigators knew that uncovering the full story would take time. The relationship between James and Marjorie appeared to be more complex than it had seemed, and the motive for the crime remained unclear. On October 17, 2006, James Hartley was formally charged with first-degree murder. The trial began in March 2007 in Wilson County Court. The case attracted local media attention as rumors of a possible secret relationship between James and Marjorie Hartley spread throughout the city. Prosecutors, led by District Attorney Sarah Evans, based their case on fingerprints on a scarf, entries in James's journal, and testimony from neighbors. The defense, represented by attorney David Lawson, argued that the evidence was insufficient to prove guilt and that James had no motive for the murder. At the first hearing, the prosecutor presented physical evidence. The scarf used to strangle her was the centerpiece. An examination confirmed the presence of James's fingerprints, although the defense insisted that he could have touched the scarf in everyday circumstances. James's diary was read in court. Entries such as, "I can't live without her, but it's destroying me," shocked the jury. The prosecution interpreted them as evidence of emotional dependence, possibly escalating into conflict. Letters found in Marjorie's bedroom were also read, emphasizing their personal nature. Witnesses played a key role. Linda Walker described James and Marjorie's bizarre behavior, mentioning an occasion when they held hands. Thomas Brown confirmed that he had seen them in close contact. Forensic psychologist Dr. Emily Carter testified, explaining that James's notes suggested a possible unhealthy attachment, although she could not confirm the sexual nature of the relationship without direct evidence. Marjorie's financial records, showing large withdrawals, were presented as a possible motive. The prosecutor suggested that James might have demanded money and Marjorie had refused to continue to give it. The defense called James's mother, Elizabeth, who argued that her son was incapable of violence. She described a close but normal relationship between James and Marjorie. Lawson, the defense attorney, also pointed out the lack of DNA or other direct evidence linking James to the time of the murder. He suggested that someone else might have broken into the house, although police found no evidence of forced entry. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury, having heard all the evidence, retired to deliberate on March 28, 2007. By this point, public opinion in Wilson was divided. Some believed James was guilty, while others believed the case was built on circumstantial evidence. On March 30, 2007, a jury in Wilson County Court returned a verdict in the case of James Hartley. After 2 days of deliberations, they found him guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Richard Thompson sentenced James to life in prison without parole. The court's decision was based on a combination of evidence: fingerprints on a scarf, journal entries, neighbors' testimony, and circumstantial evidence of an emotional affair between James and Marjorie. Although there was no direct evidence proving the sexual nature of their relationship, prosecutor Sarah Evans convinced the jury that the crime was motivated by conflict caused by Marjorie's attempt to break off their affair. James remained silent as the verdict was read. His lawyer, David Lawson, announced plans to appeal, arguing that the case was built on speculation, not fact. James's mother, Elizabeth, who was in the courtroom, left the courtroom in tears, refusing to speak to reporters. For her, the loss of her mother and her son's conviction were a double blow. Reactions from Wilson residents were mixed. For many, the case came as a shock because of Marjorie's reputation as a respected woman. Local media outlets like the Wilson Times ran stories discussing how family secrets could lurk beneath the facade of normal life. The church where Marjorie was an active member held a memorial service, but some parishioners refused to attend, citing rumors about her relationship with her grandson. Neighbors on Oak Street, including Linda Walker and Thomas Brown, expressed regret that they had not seen the warning signs sooner. Police reports released after the trial clarified the details of the investigation. Investigators never found any additional evidence to support a sexual relationship, but James's notes and behavior suggested a strong emotional dependency. The financial motive for Marge's money remained secondary, since the envelope of cash in James's room was not directly connected to the crime. The Hartley case left its mark on Wilson. It became a topic of discussion at local schools, churches, and community gatherings, raising questions about family dynamics and hidden problems. James was sent to the state prison in Raleigh, where, as of 2008, he refused interviews and contact with the outside world.